Hello, welcome back to the channel. I have a very exciting video for you today. I've been waiting to make this one for a long time. This is every MCU movie ranked. A few weeks ago I did a video with my brother Nathan where we put all these movies into a tier list, so go check out that video if you want to. But this one is my personal list and it is an individual ranking of each movie. I just rewatched every single MCU movie over this quarantine, all 23 of them. So without further ado, here we go. Down at number 23, The Incredible Hulk. I have a video about this movie up on the channel, and gosh, this is by far my least favorite in the MCU. It's boring, there's nothing interesting about it. I don't think that Bruce Banner is an interesting character in this movie. It's so brooding and mopey for no reason, and it completely lacks anything that makes the MCU special. This, of course, was the second MCU movie ever, right off the heels of Iron Man in the same year. Made by Paramount, this is before Disney had bought Marvel Studios, and they were definitely still trying to figure out what this was going to be, but there were hints at this concept. There were references to Iron Man in this movie. Of course, Robert Downey Jr. shows up at the very, very end, briefly. So it was definitely part of the genesis of the MCU, but it is by far the worst. Now, at number 22, I've got Thor: The Dark World. This movie gets hated on a lot, and it deserves it in a lot of ways. There are redeeming qualities, for sure. It's not terribly boring to watch, but it is very, very basic. They took what Thor did and basically did virtually the exact same thing. But in a much more dull, less interesting way. It's interesting because this was after Avengers, this is right after Disney bought the franchise, and the movie's not bad, but it is very, very basic. And it feels like they hadn't gotten creative enough to make their movies different from one another. But there had been great movies before this, so I don't know, it was a misstep. It was a misstep. So next up at number 21, I have Iron Man 2. This is one of the movies in the MCU that gets the most hate. I loved this movie when I was a kid, and parts of it are very entertaining. I like the last fight with Tony and Rhodey in their suits fighting off all of the drone robot hammer bot things. That's pretty cool. The rest of it is pretty goofy, and I do not like the stuff about Tony discovering a new element, although I do kind of like that he has to take a look at his past with his father, but it's messy, and as much as I love Jon Favreau as a director, this was another misstep. While they were finding their footing, getting in the groove of what the MCU was going to be. This was, of course, pre-Avengers. I think it might have been the third MCU movie ever. I do have the feeling they wanted to rush out a sequel to Iron Man after the success of that movie. Next up at number 20, I have Thor. Thor is a fun enough movie to watch. They set up the character. I do think that it is a mistake to think that you need to take a character like this onto Earth. And I think they obviously learned that after Guardians of the Galaxy and different things where they don't feel as tied to Earth. But I like Thor's character arc of becoming a more mature king, more responsible person with his powers. But in terms of style and direction, this is a small thing, but the Dutch angles, every other shot is completely off its axis. It's nuts. But it did, of course, give us Thor, it gave us Loki, it gave us Natalie Portman, who doesn't get a lot to do in the first two Thor movies, but I have a strong feeling she's going to be great in Thor: Love and Thunder. So, Thor is serviceable. It's a fine entry into the MCU as one of the first films that laid the groundwork for the future. Number 19, I have Captain Marvel. Now, I want you to believe me when I say, I went into this movie wanting to love it, or at least like it. I was rooting for this movie so hard. So many people were hating on it before it even came out, and I gave this movie the biggest chance, every benefit of the doubt. I wanted it to be at least good. And it's really disappointing. It's very reminiscent of some of the very early MCU movies. It feels like a Phase 1 movie in the worst ways. Brie Larson, I don't know if I want to go as far as to say she was miscast, because I think most of the problems with her character in this movie come down to the writing. That is the biggest problem, I think, because Carol Danvers is not an interesting character at all, because she spends so much of the movie not knowing who she is, and it doesn't feel like she has a meaningful arc to get to the end except to remember who she was, and to punch harder and be more powerful with her fists. It feels very, it's a very bland way to treat a character that I think could be interesting and has potential going forward, because I like Brie Larson as an actor. I think she will be good in future movies, at least I really hope so, and that the writers just could not pinpoint what they wanted this person to be. She's snarky and standoffish and tries to be charming and funny and all of the things at once, all of the MCU character things at one time. They make her everything and she becomes nothing. And I think that there's a future for her in the MCU. Obviously, they are banking on her having a future in the MCU. So I am very hopeful for a sequel, but we'll see. I wanted to like it, and it really, it's not terrible though. Don't get me wrong, it's just very middle of the road for the MCU. Next up, at number 18, I have Captain America: The First Avenger. This was my favorite of the MCU movies as a kid. It feels very much like a Phase 1 movie, not to say it aged poorly, but many of the films that came after it are better. But as an origin story, I enjoyed a lot. I love the character of Steve Rogers in this movie, and I mean, he's such an inspiring character. He's heroic and noble and just a good person, and that's what I love about him. And they show that very well in this movie, even though it definitely plays like a Phase 1 movie, which isn't inherently a bad thing, but his next two movies that came after this one are better, but I enjoy this as an origin story. Number 17, I have AntMan and the Wasp. This is one that a lot of people don't like. I happen to really like it. I think it's funny, very fun to watch. It's easy to watch. It's not very high stakes. The resolution of what happens with Hope's mom, Janet, was poorly executed, because they spend this movie having to make a choice. Do they save Ghost or do they save Janet? And in about 30 seconds they realize they can do both. So there's that. It's pretty much a filler movie, but I love the characters and the actors in it enough that I had a great time watching it. I think Hope was a standout character. I love Ant-Man as a character, so that's my number 17. Number 16, I have Avengers Age of Ultron. Definitely the worst of the 4 Avengers movies. It feels very much like they wanted to do a follow-up to the Avengers, and not much of consequence. It's hard to make every movie feel like it has massive consequences. This is a fun movie. Ultron is a fine villain, but it's pretty much the Avengers, but it gives you what the Avengers gave you, but lesser, but to a lesser extent. I remember watching this in IMAX the weekend it came out when I was like in freshman year of high school and loving it. But it could have been better, but luckily the two movies that came after it are some, well, we'll get to those. At number 15, I have Iron Man 3. I like Iron Man 3 more than most people. It's a fun movie. I love what they do with Tony as a character, where he is separated from his suit and has to show who he is as a person without it. So I like that stuff. I don't mind the Mandarin twist at all because I don't read the comic books. And it's a good movie. It doesn't feel like it fits in totally with the MCU, especially not with the other two Iron Man movies. It is a very Shane Black movie. I like Shane Black movies, so I mean, that's fine, and it has a different sense of style, but I do like what they did with the character, and so I enjoy this movie. At number 14, I have Black Panther. I did another video about Black Panther on the channel. I do really like this movie. It has grown on me over the last 2 years as I've watched it 3 times. I really like Chadwick Boseman as T'Challa. I'm very excited to see more of him. You can go check out my other video about this movie if you want to hear all my thoughts, but I do think this is a fantastic movie. Number 13, I have Ant-Man. I love Ant-Man. It's a heist movie. It's a comedy. It feels different from the other MCU movies in all the right ways. Ant-Man is a super fun and also very interesting and very human character. That is my favorite quality of my favorite MCU characters, is that they are very human and very relatable, and you feel connected to their struggles and you care about them. And I love Ant-Man. And next up at number 12, I have Spider-Man Far From Home. I think this is a solid Spider-Man sequel. I love that we take Spider-Man out of New York. I love Jake Gyllenhaal as Mysterio. It's a super funny movie. I love the action. I love Spider-Man. And it's a great follow-up to Homecoming, and I'm very excited to see the 3rd Spider-Man movie in this series. Number 11, I have Avengers. I have a video on the channel about this movie as well. It's a classic. They brought the characters together for the first time. It's something that shouldn't have worked, that works spectacularly. At number 10, I have Captain America Civil War. This is a very interesting movie. It raises the moral questions about superheroes in the best way possible. The conflict is interesting and compelling between these main characters. For the record, I fall on Tony's side of the Accords debate. But yeah, this is a very interesting movie, very thriller-esque, much like Captain America the Winter Soldier, which I'll be talking about later. But yeah, this is a great movie. Number 9, I have SpiderMan Homecoming. This is probably my favorite live-action Spider-Man movie. Actually, it is my favorite live-action Spider-Man movie. It's just such a consistent movie. It's solid from start to finish. It's very funny. It's interesting. The characters are great. They didn't use Iron Man too much or too little. I love this movie. It's a great one. It used to be my favorite MCU movie, but my opinions have shifted over the years. Next up at number 8, I have Doctor Strange. I love Doctor Strange more than I think most people do. I love the character. Very Tony Stark-esque in the beginning as he learns to humble himself throughout the movie. I love the visuals and the concept of using magic in the MCU. It's such a cool thing, the way that the world gets bent during these action sequences. It's super duper cool, and I like the story, and I'm pumped for Multiverse of Madness. I kind of wish Scott Derrickson got to finish his vision for that, but if Sam Raimi's doing it, I'm in. Number 7, I have Thor Ragnarok. This movie is one of the funniest in the MCU. I love its sense of style. Very similar to the Guardians of the Galaxy style of being in space and being funny. But Taika Waititi brings such an energy to this movie that I think Thor really needed. And it makes me very excited for Love and Thunder. I love Taika Waititi as a director and as an actor for Korg. So that is a great movie. That's my number 7. Number 6 is Iron Man, the one that started it all. It's a great movie that lays the groundwork for everything. Outside of superhero movies, it's just a really good movie. Robert Downey Jr. blows all the expectations for this character out of the water. He is, he brings such a human and interesting dynamic to who this superhero is. The villain of Jedediah Stane is fine. I like aspects of him and his dynamic with Tony. He could have been more interesting as a villain, but you could say that about so many of these movies, so that's more of a nitpick at that point. Captain America the Winter Soldier is my number 5. It is a spy thriller, it is an action movie, it is deeply interesting, it raises many questions about security and privacy, and it's very relevant, and I love the idea of you take this guy who was a soldier in World War II where everything was so black and white, you knew who the good guys were, you knew who the bad guys were, and you put him in modern day, and it's so much less clear about who you can trust and who the good guys are and who the bad guys are. And maybe your own country has bad guys in it. You know, it takes that character who's used to knowing these things and makes him question everything he thought he knew. Now onto my top 4. I have thought that each of these 4 were my favorite MCU movies at different points, so just know that these 4 are, like, top-tier favorites for me. Number 4 is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. You take Guardians of the Galaxy, one of the best movies in the MCU, and you elevate the characters to another level. Sequels are expected to be bigger, but instead of bringing this movie bigger in scale, James Gunn brings it bigger in terms of characters and really going deep into who these people are. I love Ego as a villain. Star-Lord, Peter Quill, is my favorite character in the MCU. He's my favorite hero. He's very human and flawed and funny, but more importantly than that, very compelling to me. Number 3, Guardians of the Galaxy. It's just a bit more consistent than Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Volume 2 packs more of an emotional punch for sure, especially for me personally, but Guardians of the Galaxy 1 is, I mean, it came along and did something very different for the MCU and really laid the groundwork for what the future was going to hold for this series. Alright, we got 2 more. Number 2, Avengers Infinity War. I just rewatched this one last night. It's an excellent movie, man. It should not have worked with this many characters, but it is, in a lot of ways, and people have said this, Thanos' movie. He's intimidating and such a large presence. And you bring together these characters who have never been on screen together, and it's so much fun watching them play off each other and what they get to do with these characters who they spent a decade establishing, and then just putting them all in one movie to play off of each other with, and you don't need to give, you know, backstories or even development for these characters in this movie, even though some of them have it, because these characters have been developed, you know who they are, and so you just get to have fun watching them play off each other, and this movie just gets to establish Thanos for my number 1, Avengers Endgame. The reason I like Endgame better than Infinity War mostly is because it is an ending. Infinity War is a great movie, but it doesn't work necessarily without Endgame. I love the time travel aspects, I love the characters, I just wish Peter Quill were there, but that's okay. Everything about it's pretty great. It's a remarkable movie that, again, it shouldn't have worked in a hypothetical sense. But the fact that this franchise comes to a head in this magnificent way, in this excellent, excellent movie, that is a satisfying conclusion for every character who won't be returning, at least we don't think will be returning, whatever, is a miracle that they pulled it off. So that's my list. That's my ranking. Thank you for tuning into this video. Go ahead and subscribe. My next video might be a movie review, might be some movie news, might be another ranking, a tier list, something like that. Lots of fun movie stuff on this channel. Go check out some of my other stuff. Lots of stuff I'm proud of on this channel. Thank you, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.